All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate you taking the time. I know most of you are familiar with the company, but this is a series that we started in January with the first event at Casa Tua to sort of like walk the community and customers and beyond really through the essence of the brand. So I'll provide some context about the DRC. Then I'll talk about the mechanics of rape as a weapon of war and how, like different groups, the Congolese army, rebels, militias, use it to sort of like traumatize communities. And then we'll talk about Ponzi Hospital, our partner, and Dr. Mukwege, its founder. And then we'll finish with a little walkthrough through our company, what we do to rehabilitate survivors, and then I'll open up the floor for the Q&A. So DRC is obviously the big country in the middle, not to be confused with the Republic of Congo, our smaller neighbor. The Ponzi Hospital is located in the east, Kinshasa is here in the west. The country is roughly the size of Western Europe, so it's pretty big. Like the map really doesn't do it justice, but that's just because the African map is like scaled downwards. So Congo has a very brutal colonial history. It was colonized by Belgium, but not by the state of Belgium. So initially what happened is that the King of Belgium, King Leopold, was pretty much jealous of his neighbors in Europe, France, the UK, the Dutch, and he commissioned his own little exploration. The explorer that actually discovered the Congo on his behalf was an American explorer, Morgan Stanley. And what happened is that he claimed the country, but not on behalf of the state, but on behalf of his own rule. So Congo was this really unique case in history where it was a private property of one ruler. So he ruled the country from roughly 1850 all the way up until 1908, and he's notorious for killing millions of Congolese. His rule coincided with the Industrial Revolution in Europe. So he really benefited from the exploitation of rubber, which at the time was used for wheels. So he made a lot of money. And in 1908, because the world started to sort of like wake up to colonization and exploitation, the Belgian state decided to essentially take the colony away from him. So we only became a Belgian colony in 1908. We got our independence in 1960. The guy that sort of like came in power ruled for 32 years, was a brutal dictatorship, plundered the country, mismanagement, bad governance, got us into a pretty bad situation. And then in 1997, he was toppled by a coup that essentially plunged the country into a war that officially ended in 2003, but really we're still suffering the consequences of that. And that's primarily why we started this company, because today the entire region in the eastern part of the country has been completely stabilized. Because in 1998, what happened is that a lot of our neighbors came into the country. It was known as the first African World War, and their impact is still felt today because they're sponsoring rebel groups. Their armies are still in the country because there's a lot of interest in Congo's natural resources. We're probably the richest African country when it comes to minerals and wealth. So this is kind of the background of the country. So Congo is obviously a failed state. I mean, we have a government, but things are not pretty well organized and well run. And as a result, the war is causing a lot of problems. And one of the main issues obviously is rape, which is the core of our company. So according to the American Journal of Public Health, you have about 48 women that are raped in DRC every hour, so that's about a rape a minute. It's the worst level of rape in the world, so we hold that pretty sad record. And the reasons for this are multiple, and the characteristics are also multiple. So the attacks are essentially designed to really sort of create fear and instill fear in communities. They use mass rapes. They use collective and public rape, and the rapes are systematic, so it's pretty indiscriminate. They don't really dissociate between a young girl who's 6 or a more aged woman who's 70. It's designed to completely render communities powerless, and it's been working pretty effectively. As a result of the rape, you have obviously mass displacement of populations, because what happens is that rebel groups and militias raid villages. Typically, it's for the control of strategic resources. So once they displace population, because obviously the populations are scared, it creates a vacuum that they fill in. It reduces populations, it destroys obviously the fabric of the local economy, and it destroys the social and family life. So here's a testimony from a survivor, just to sort of like walk you through what their experiences are.
Ule Bunyakiri ndio alinikutanaka. Alikuya magharibi saa 10, wakuya tushambulia. Batoto kushangilia hivi bakaanza wanabakatakata na mipanga na bababo. Ndio bakaniingilia kuchumba nilikimbiliaka bakanibaka. Batano bote ndio balinipitaka hapo. Mie balinibakaka na bakachoma nyumba yote.
So this man is essentially the reason we started this company, Dr. Denis Mukwege. He was studying gynecology in France, and all he wanted to do was to come back in his country and open, like his network of clinics for profit. But when he came back to the country and actually started pursuing his dreams, he quickly realized that his hospitals were being flooded with people seeking treatment, and he couldn't turn them away. So he essentially transformed from like a pretty classic gynecologist to a specialist in the treatment of pretty graphic, gynecological trauma. He opened his hospital in 1999 in the city of Bukavu in the east, and in 2018 he won the Nobel Peace Prize, obviously for the work he's been doing in the region. And the winning of his Nobel Peace Prize really helped us, us being the country, because it's started to really shine a spotlight on the issue. And now you've got more organizations that are getting involved and are trying to alleviate the pain of some of these communities. Here are some statistics about the work he's been doing. He's treated about 68,000 survivors to date, and they also provide a wide array of treatments at the hospital. So when you aggregate the entirety of what they provide, they've treated about 400 plus thousand people. He also developed a very specific model that they called the Panzi holistic model that basically relies on 4 pillars. So the first pillar is medical care. So that's you're essentially bruised from a rape, and you come and you seek medical care. They'll provide that for you. Then there's psychosocial assistance. So that's more actually treating the trauma from a psychological standpoint. They provide legal services, because one of the big things that Dr. Mukwege talks about is that in order for the survivors to sort of heal, they need justice. And that's a concept that is constantly pushing. So Ponzi actually has all these legal clinics where if you want, and they encourage you to, you can say justice. And then finally, they have the socio-economic reintegration programs, and that's where Congo Clothing sort of focuses its resources. So that's job skills training, so teaching the survivors a marketable skill so that once they get out of the hospital, they have something they can do and provide for their families. And that one is very important. So based on the 4 pillars, we decided to create Congo Clothing Company. So for us, we decided to use fashion because obviously this is a very difficult and sad issue. And unfortunately, when it comes to these types of problems in Africa, a lot of people approach it from the basic of, let's start a foundation, let's, show people a whole bunch of sad videos and photos and appeal, to their emotion. We decided to flip the script a little bit and create a for-profit company to touch a wider public, but from the lens of, something that's appealing aesthetically, something where we're not necessarily appealing to, the negativity of the situation, but we're drawing you into this problem, but first and foremost by showing you something that you would like to have in your wardrobe. And we really tried to mix, a Western aesthetic, so that's why we started with the denim, with a little bit of, Congolese aesthetic. We just recently launched the loungewear collection, so we have 2 different lines, and similar to what we're trying to do with the denim, where we're trying to tell stories through the clothing. every single loungewear line that's going to come down the road has a specific story. So we started a few months ago with a drop that we call Metropolis. So we're trying to play on the similarities between the cities of Miami, obviously it's here, that's where we're based, and Kinshasa, which is the capital. And then we dropped a line called Universe about 2 weeks ago with a very specific design that we created essentially to remind people that at the end of the day, we should think of ourselves first and foremost as human beings living in, you know, like the same planet. So it's kind of like that idea of we should care for one another. So someone that's in Miami, though it might not necessarily be connected with, you know, like a person in Kinshasa, at the end of the day, if you start thinking that, you know, we're all brothers and sisters, then you might care for the fate of these women. So these are sort of like the ideas and the narratives we're trying to bake into the products. Our logo essentially embodies everything I've been talking about up till this point. So this is a broken down version of it. So we have the zigzag. Obviously we've got the words, pretty self-explanatory, and we have 2 straight lines. And so the idea is that, you know, like the zigzag, we took that from the Kuba Kingdom, which is a 17th century kingdom that was based in what is today's southeastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And the interesting thing about that kingdom is that they're very powerful, they were thriving, obviously before the colonizers came, but the women in the kingdom were very famous for their geometric patterns. So we sort of like played around, you know, like these patterns. As you can see, this is like an authentic Kuba cloth. So that's where our zigzag idea comes from. And it also echoes the fact that the journeys of these survivors are pretty tumultuous. So it's also a play on the fact that, you know, like life is not really a straight line and it really moves around in zigzag. And then we added the 2 straight lines as an echo to our more Western aesthetic, you know, the denim, the loungewear, the t-shirts, but it's also a play on, you know, like, you know, you've got straight line. It's a reminder that, you know, like so long as you keep your foundation, you know, like grounded, you will see light at the end of the tunnel. So that's essentially the idea behind our logo. And then from the onset, we really tried to build this brand as a brand that's, you know, like really focused on community. Because from the US perspective, or, you know, like the outside of Congo perspective, it's really about educating folks like yourselves and, like, you know, like shining a spotlight on the issue. So we started with a very basic campaign about 6 months ago when we launched, and we asked people from all around the world, China, the UK, Colombia, what were their thoughts on gender-based violence in 2-3 lines. And so, you know, people gave us, you know, like pretty deep answers, but what we found out after that exercise is that a lot of people had no idea that, you know, like this was unfolding in the middle of Africa. It got them to think critically, and what it does really is that it builds an affinity with the brand. And so this is kind of like the affinity that we're really trying to nurture as we scale. The concept we're really trying to fight, like what we believe is the root cause of this problem is toxic masculinity. It's pervasive all around the world. Obviously, it's a big deal here in the United States. I think a lot of men are oblivious to it because it became somewhat baked into our society. But this is what, you know, like causes, you know, like rape. This is why men, you know, feel that sort of like animal instinct and sort of like unleash, you know, like this type of violence on women. It comes in multiple forms. It could be something as simple as, you know, like guys, you know, like bragging about, you know, like their nights and, you know, like how many girls they had, you know, like relationships with. There are different levels of toxic masculinity, but like the idea is to really, you know, like make us aware of it and like work on sort of like, you know, like changing sort of like the paradigm, right? Like there are different ways to be manly without necessarily doing and channeling some of the negative energy we've been channeling over the past decades or so. Our business model is pretty simple. It might evolve over time, but right now we took a very basic approach of, for every item that we sell, we essentially train the survivors on sewing. We picked something that was aligned with our vertical, clothing obviously. So we teach them how to sew, and then once they get discharged from the hospital, we finance the purchase of a sewing machine. So they have a marketable skill, and then they have a productive tool that they can take home and can hopefully become financially independent with. The idea long term is a bit self-interested, because what we're doing also is we're building a labor force, because ultimately what we want to do is we want to shift our production to Congo. Right now we manufacture in Colombia, but we need like a little bit of time to build the labor force so that when we decide to set up, like shop locally, we've got, like people that are trained and who can manufacture the stuff we produce. And that will have a pretty significant impact, because obviously you're going to pay people, like decent, wages. They're going to foster economic prosperity in the communities, and typically this tends to have a virtuous effect where a lot of things start integrating, and that's how a community can grow. So that's our sort of long-term plan. And as far as action, obviously what you can do to help is you can buy our clothes. We donate about a third directly to the hospital to run the programs I told you about previously. You can connect people to the cause. Visit ponzifoundation.org, that's the hospital's website. You can watch City of Joy on Netflix, pretty good documentary about the doctor and his work with the survivors. And then I'll leave you with this video, short, and it's Dr. Mukwege's acceptance speech when he won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Dans la nuit tragique du 6 octobre 1996, des rebelles ont attaqué notre hôpital à Lemera, en République démocratique du Congo. Plus de 30 personnes tuées, les patients abattus dans leurs lits, à bout portant, le personnel ne pouvant pas fuir, tué de sang-froid. Je ne pouvais pas imaginer que ce n'était que le début. Obligé de quitter Lemera, en 1999, nous avons créé l'hôpital de Panzi à Bukavu, où je travaille aujourd'hui comme gynécologue obstétricien. La première patiente admise était une victime de viol ayant reçu un coup de feu dans ses organes génitaux. La violence macabre ne connaissait aucune limite. Cette violence, malheureusement, ne s'est jamais arrêtée. Un jour comme les autres, l'hôpital a reçu un appel. Au bout du fil, un collègue en larmes implorait « S'il vous plaît, envoyez-nous rapidement une ambulance. S'il vous plaît, dépêchez-vous. » Ainsi, nous avons envoyé une ambulance, comme nous le faisons habituellement. 2 heures plus tard, l'ambulance est revenue. À l'intérieur, une petite fille de juste 18 mois. Elle saignait abondamment et a été immédiatement amenée en salle d'opération. Quand je suis arrivé, les infirmières, toutes en larmes, la vessie du nourrisson, son appareil génital, son rectum étaient gravement endommagés par la pénétration d'un adulte. Nous prions en silence. Mon Dieu, dites-nous que ce que nous voyons n'est pas vrai. Dites-nous que c'est un mauvais rêve. Dites-nous qu'au réveil, tout ira bien. Mais ce n'était pas un mauvais rêve. C'était la réalité. C'est devenu notre nouvelle réalité en République démocratique du Congo.
All right, so this is the end.